Hello, and welcome to the AOPA Air Safety Institute's webinar, How to Not Scare Your DPE, Pass Your Check Ride, and Be a Safe Pilot. My name is John Collins, and I'm the Manager of Aviation Safety Programs for the AOPA Air Safety Institute, and I'll be your moderator for this evening's discussion. Screening your questions and producing the webinar is Paul Darras, Senior Director of the Air Safety Institute. A few housekeeping items before we begin. First of all, please make sure you've muted your microphones. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, we will not be able to troubleshoot them. However, we found that most audio issues can be solved by logging out and logging back into the webinar. We'll take questions throughout the webinar. Now let me show you our panel here. This is for PCs, laptops, that sort of thing. You can see that there's a control panel you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. Questions are done using the question mark. If you are on a iPad or a smartphone, you may see something that looks like this. Microphone icon is in the upper right-hand corner. Questions are down at the bottom. And a little note about the webcams. You should see us at the top of your screen if you're on a PC or a laptop, maybe even on a tablet. On a smartphone, you may have to scroll left or right to see the webcams or to see the slides as we go through the webinar. Wings credit is available for the webinar, and if you signed up for the webinar with your FAA Safety.gov email account, it will be automatically credited to your Wings account after 7 days. If you haven't done that or you used a different email, you can submit your FAA Safety.gov email to us through the questions field, and we'll make sure you get the Wings credit. And something new we started this month, for those of you who are participating in the AOPA Pilot Passport Program, we have a lovely badge for you and 1,000 points to spur you on your way to the whatever goal it is you're trying to reach with that. We'll talk more about how you can get that badge and the points at the end of the webinar. And a recording of this webinar will be made and will be available after the webinar. Okay. Sure, I don't have any more echoes there. So what are we doing tonight? Well, as you can see, we have 4 designated pilot examiners that we've pulled in from around the country to talk to you about what they're seeing in check rides, things that raise some concerns with them, maybe even scare them in some cases. And let me introduce our panel. With us tonight, starting off alphabetically, Chris Anderson in Wisconsin. He is a corporate pilot, a flight instructor, and a designated pilot examiner for both helicopters and airplanes. He's been a DPE since 2004 and has conducted over 2,100 practical tests. Jason Blair from Michigan is an active single and multi-engine instructor and an FAA Designated Pilot Examiner with 5,000 hours or more, probably now, total time and over 3,000 hours instruction given. In his role as an examiner, he has issued more than 1,000 pilot certificates. He writes for multiple aviation publications and actively works within the general aviation industry. Christine Mortine in Ohio is an FAA-appointed designated pilot examiner who's currently conducting checks for airplane single-engine, light sport, private pilot, commercial, instrument, and initial CFI. She is also a trained Cirrus instructor and a state liaison for the Recreational Aviation Foundation. She also enjoys working with AOPA as a seminar presenter and is one of my FERC instructors. Christine also provides tailwheel instruction at decathlon when she's not trying to get away from things and fly her Cessna 185 to the mountains. And finally, we have Sean Mullen out in Nevada. He is also a designated pilot examiner, providing tests in single and multi-engine airplanes from private pilot through ATP certificates and flight instructor ratings. Sean was previously the chief flight instructor of a Part 141 program for 11 years and has been a DPE since 2012 and currently flies the Airbus A320 for a Part 121 carrier. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Welcome to the webinar. Look forward to a really interesting discussion. Look forward to having lots of discussion. Now, I did get a question here. Somebody would like you guys to wave. So I'm going to go through the list again and you can all wave. So Chris Anderson, give us a wave. All right, Jason Blair, wave away. There you go. Christine and Sean. Excellent. Okay, so we've got that block checked. All right, so The other thing that we're going to do tonight, they're going to answer your questions, and most of this webinar is going to be answering your questions because that's what we're here for. As you know, examiners love to ask you, the candidate, questions. So let's make them feel a little of the heat tonight. Now, to set this up, we did ask them to submit, there we go. We did ask them to submit a list of 10 items that really scared them when they saw applicants come to them for practical exams. And we looked at that list, and it's a good list. It really is. But if we went to try to address all of that, they do all the talking, and you wouldn't get that opportunity. So we asked them to narrow it down to 2. And so we're going to go through and talk about the items that each of them see on exams that give them some concern. So here we go. And Chris, we'll start off with you. The very first thing that you were talking about botched auto rotation procedures. Now, as a helicopter DPE, that's something I'm not familiar with, but you know, what happens there? What's the issue?
The auto rotations, you know, it's what we do when we have an engine failure. We just enter a glide, and that's what we call an auto rotation in the helicopter world, or a glide. Anyway, you get my idea. We have an engine failure, we enter an auto rotation. Both of my 2 things here with the auto rotations and then here talking about the engine out procedures, both fall under the same thing, and that's failure to fly the aircraft or maintain control of the aircraft. In the auto rotation, probably the biggest thing that raises concern for me is how they enter it. If, for example, there seems to either be a delay in lowering the collective while the rotor RPM can reduce rather quickly. In some cases, they'll get the collective down in the auto rotation, but as the RPM comes back, it has a tendency to maybe come up to or exceed the high end of the RPM limits. In either case, I have to intervene there, you know, to keep the aircraft under control. So that's one thing, is lowering the collective incorrectly. The second thing is moving that cyclic aft and setting the proper attitude. That does a couple of things. Number one, moving the cyclic. The helicopter has a tendency to dip nose down when we enter an auto rotation, and a lot of people aren't very good at arresting that pitch down attitude. So we need to bring the cyclic aft. And of course, that also affects RPM control as well. So there's this balance between your collective, your cyclic, and of course you got your pedals too. We call it being in trim or coordination in airplane flight, but removing the power from the rotor system changes the amount of pedal we need to have in there as well. So when they make the entry into the auto rotation incorrectly, it can go rather cattywampus pretty quick. One of the scenarios that I use for the engine failure part of a helicopter flight is during the cross country. Scenario may be that, hey, you're looking down, you see your cylinder head temperature extremely high, your oil temperature really high, and your oil pressure low. What do you think is going to be happening fairly soon? Well, they catch on, well, my engine's going to quit. Well, what do you think we should do? And that's when they enter the auto. Some instructors, some examiners do this engine failure thing by just rolling off the throttle on the collective and announcing simulated engine failure. And they're kind of in tune to that versus the scenario that I use that gets into that. It catches them by surprise. And failure to fly the aircraft in this case, it kind of bungles them up. I've had people not lower the collective as they roll off the throttle and the RPM comes down. And like I mentioned before, lowering the collective all the way down, but the RPM comes up and they don't arrest it on the high side. And either one of those, if I don't correct, can become rather troublesome rather quickly. From that aspect of it. So it's really the entry part of it. The glide part of the auto, I have a lot of applicants will just sit there and watch the world go by going, I'm gonna put the helicopter on this spot, but it looks like they're gonna overshoot or undershoot the spot and they don't make corrections to get to the spot. It doesn't get me nearly as excited as the entry, but the fact that they're just along for the ride doesn't really show that they're in control of the helicopter.
Sure.
And the last part of the auto rotation is down at the bottom, the flare, the pitch, the level, and the cushion part. There's a lot going on. Some people have a tendency to super focus on their spot that they're trying to land, that they'll use some incorrect techniques to try to hit that spot exactly where they want to be. And that can also get rather exciting pretty quickly. Whether flaring extremely high and bringing it to a hover where we essentially are falling from a high altitude, or trying to milk out what RPM is left into the system down low to the ground. And a lot going on there all of the last minute. So that's really kind of the thing there, is flying that aircraft. And which, if you want me to go right into the multi-engine, it's really kind of the same thing there.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
The multi-engine, I've done a lot of these commercial multi add-ons and MEIs lately, but it's really focusing on flying the aircraft. And again, holding the airspeed, the heading, the altitude, if it's possible, kind of goes out the window. And one of the scenarios that gets, again, like in the helicopter world, rather exciting rather quickly is that engine failure after takeoff. And it's a simulated engine failure. We don't do it any lower than 400 feet off the ground, no lower airspeed than safe single engine. But what happens when we do move that throttle back to idle, people are very slow on lowering the nose or going through the engine out procedure to ensure that their gear and their flaps are up and they're on their way to feathering that offending engine's propeller. And so the airspeed gets low, and then the next thing you know, their directional control is decaying because the airspeed's out, and they're low to the ground, and they feel like they need to pull back on the yoke, and that just makes things all the worse. So that's another thing. It's failure to fly that aircraft, realizing that, oops, I lost an engine. I need to maintain control. Let me get the rudder in there. Let me lower the nose so I can establish my VYSE, and let's go through the engine out procedure as directed. So that's probably the most biggest one there. Another scenario that kind of is set up is when we shut down an engine in flight. I usually have them set up for cruise, and I'll say, hey, we got like the helicopter, we got an oil leak coming out from the other side. What are we going to do? And that's the response I get. And a lot of people haven't been through the scenario of a precautionary shutdown. So they modify their engine out drill, and they won't add power. They, usually the gear and the flaps are up, but we'll be up at, 5,500 feet or above, well above their single engine service ceiling. So they'll be going, I'm going to shut this down. I'm going to pull this propeller back, this throttle back, this propeller back. They never added power to the engine. In the meantime, their airspeed is, down below VYSE, and they're realizing something's not going right here. And then they go, oh, I need to add power. And then they push power on the other engine at low airspeeds, and there goes the heading control again. So it's basically flying the aircraft. Is where the things that wake me up when I'm sitting there observing the applicant that gets us all in trouble.
Yeah, and I remember I had a multi-engine student I watched. He was making a single engine approach, and he was coming into land. I could see him down at the far end of the runway, and of course that imaginary fuel truck pulled out in the middle of the runway and stopped, and he went around but didn't clean everything up. And I was standing there at the FBO watching him drift off center line, start to get lower, and I knew, oh, this is going to end in a failure. And I did finally see him start to correct as he passed the FBO and got to the end of the runway. And I'm like, oh man, I feel bad for him, but I know, I knew exactly what happened. And when we discussed it after the check ride, he just kind of forgot about cleaning things up and was trying to focus on it, and then just didn't pay attention. So definitely a interesting scenario to try to come out of, and definitely something that would result in a failure. So anybody else want to join in on that at all? Any other stories like that, or just should we just go on to the next?
Pretty thorough.
I mean, I'll add quick the multi-engine, and I think Chris and I are both seeing very similar things. That especially the add-ons, especially when somebody's trying to add this on really quickly, and they're doing short courses, they're a little bit behind the aircraft in many cases, especially if it's avionics they haven't been in, and if they get bogged down in that, they just kind of lose that basic control of the aircraft. And anytime we stop flying, that's when we start scaring the examiner a little bit.
Well, and that's good you jumped in there, Jason. You're the next one up on scary applicant hot topics here. So you've got a couple there, and those also have some really interesting end results.
I do, and one scares me more for long term, and one scares me more in immediate sense on the flight portion as we're doing this. The long term, it's interesting, especially on instrument check rides, how many times we have things going wrong and we're full scale deflection or flying minimums, and somebody just isn't paying attention to the fact that we're going to need to go missed, and they simply don't do it. And if we think about that in real life, if that's the base skill that they're working with, and they're not willing to make that miss decision, it really might mean that we're going to end up hitting something. It really might mean that we're going to end up hitting something in real life.
Hey, Jason, we're getting a big echo on you here. I'm not sure.
We'll give it a little pause here and see if that got a little bit better. So I think as we think about that decision making, this part of it in real life, on the check ride, it's less likely we're going to actually run into something if we haven't gone missed, unless we're in mountainous terrain. Sean certainly sees that out west. Where I'm at in the Midwest, it's a skill thing, and building that knowledge and understanding that if we don't make a good decision, especially in instrument conditions where you can't visually avoid something, that skill is a primary skill, and it's going to transition later into their flying. And boy, that's a hot topic for me, because it means they might go kill themselves later, and I really don't want to be the guy that signed them off if that's the skill base that they're working with. And so on a more primary one, in a couple of check rides, we see short field, soft field takeoffs and landings, and boy, the applicants really focus on the takeoff at making sure we're getting that yoke all the way back to the point where sometimes it's even aggressive as we get a little gust of wind, or as we gain some airspeed that they either come close to, or in a few cases have even had them tap the tail, and that's too much. I mean, so if we're thinking about a takeoff, the concept is to keep it really light, simulate that soft field, but it doesn't mean we have to be stalled off the ground and doing it in a way that's going to damage the aircraft. On the other side of that, when we're making the landings, people get really focused on keeping that soft field, and they over flare in the landing and end up having a little bit of energy left over, and the nose comes up and they stall a little high, and it gets to the point where we really are scaring us as the examiners a little bit, where we're getting to the point where, if we're 2 feet stalling, that's one thing. If we're 50 feet stalling, that's going to be a little scarier, and we many times have to stop that and stop the ability of the applicant to continue there, because we're going to potentially damage the aircraft. Along with that, the short field is kind of that crash to the point, and I think Sean's going to talk a little bit more about that. Where the drag the tail comes in is when we're trying to stretch out that last little bit of distance to get to the point that they've designated they're going to land on. If they're slow and a little bit low on it, they're just dragging. It does get them to that pitch point too, where sometimes the examiner has to step in to stop us from doing aircraft damage.
Okay, good.
And scaring us.
You guys don't get scared during check rides, do you? Really?
Nerves of steel, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I thought, but Christine, you look like you wanted to say something there. You're muted still. All right. Well, I think you are the next one up, though. So let's move to that.
Yeah, I've been freed. So my 2 scary topics, I would say uncoordinated flight. I mean, when you've been flying as much as we have, it doesn't take much for your hips to feel crooked, right? And when you're watching a departure, you're watching a client take off and the yoke is like this, and you're crooked, it's screaming to you, and that's not so bad in that scenario. But I do find when we have the conversation in the oral about what being coordinated is, what is yaw, How is it that when you demonstrate a stall, we don't go into a spin? What's happening there? And, you know, I wish that that connection was throughout all phases of flight more. And it could be, you know, nerves and trying to perform, but gosh, I would love to see, you know, I feel like 50% of what I see don't have that connected quite yet. And that's scary to me. If they're, you know, doing that base to final and not coordinated. So that's a scary one to me. Drives me nuts.
Do you see it more? Does it matter if you're looking at a traditional 6-pack versus a glass cockpit? Do you find it is more predominant in one type of instrumentation or another?
That's interesting. It might be more predominant in the steam gauges.
Okay.
Because it's a little more, you know, more focused to see. But again, mostly I'm seeing more advanced tickets in the glass. So hopefully they got that part sorted out.
Okay.
But yeah, making that connection, stalled and yawed, you know, what happens?
Yeah.
And can I just say one more thing? You know,
Sure.
if you're taking off and you're not coordinated and the yoke is like this, isn't that screaming? Why aren't we teaching it should be like this when you're taking off? Well, it seems really basic, so I'd love to see that be more part of it. But, you know, it's building blocks, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Learning to fly.
Yeah. Now your other one is an interesting one: lack of knowledge of FAA documents. That was kind of unique among the topics that came out. So what are you seeing there that really kind of sets you on edge?
I can't say it's scary, but you could go to maybe call it scary. Google is not an FAA document.
No.
And I, you know, on a practical level, I fly with ForeFlight. You know, I have documents in my, you know, in my devices, my EFBs and things, but I'm seeing all the time that they're not understanding the resource. They don't know how to find things because they're using it in their iPad. And if you can do it and use it in your iPad, great. But it's starting to really be a Christinism. And, you know, when I do my pre-Checkride debriefings, it's like, and you're going to bring your FAA documents that are required. And sometimes they don't even know, you know, guys, is the chart supplement just going to go away? No, it's still there. It's in ForeFlight. It's called the chart supplement. You know, just understanding what the resources are and where they come from, kind of in the same mode that we like to see that cross country for private handwritten out, so that we know they understand how ForeFlight gets those numbers.
Okay.
So really coming to the table with the documents and understanding them. Nobody knows everything. I have to look stuff up all the time too. If you can look it up in 5 seconds, I'm good. If it takes you 5 minutes, you know, out the door.
Wow. That's hard.
No.
You know, I think that's a really valid. I think that's a really valid point. There's a big difference between referencing something and looking to try and find the answer for something you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do remember my CFI Checkride. I was told, you know, you don't have to know everything, but you do have to know where it is.
Sure.
You got to be able to go right to it. Like, okay.
I think that, you know, we have to lead by example there, the CFIs in the industry, and
Yep.
I'll stop talking now.
All right. Anybody else want to join in on that topic before we move on to Sean? All right. Well, let's go. Here you go, Sean. Crashing the point on short field landings. Let me go ahead and make sure you're unmuted here. Go ahead and unmute yourself. All right. No. Well, while Sean tries to figure out how to get unmuted here, we'll there he is. Good job. Thanks.
Conflicts. One part to add to Christine's was with documents, that last part was something I brief, and I say that, you can use your tools, and as long as they are tools that we're using efficiently, you can use many things to help us, but they need to be used as a reference, not as a learning opportunity. And that's kind of the element that I evaluated against is the applicant able to use this efficiently and knows where to go, knows what to get out of it, or are they looking for the answer and searching? So that's kind of the difference that I add in my brief.
Okay. All right. Going on to the points you have there for crashing the points, crashing the point and making the go-around choice. Talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah, in both of them, I think they're both, to me, have a lot of reference to decision making. And with crashing the point on the short field, it's the students feel this urgent need to get on the ground and make their point, and they just force it too many times. When we're trying to evaluate, we're looking at a series of decisions and how you were able to get the airplane in a stable position that ended up with a successful maneuver, not just did you force it at the end and made it hit the ground, and maybe, oftentimes they're not on the center line or not coordinated or not lined up with the longitudinal axis. And there's situations that can really makes it much more entertaining to me sitting next to them and wondering how that's going to play out. And I think one of the things that we all try to evaluate is how do they take these skills and apply them for the rest of their flying career, whether that's professionally or privately. It's, you're going to fly different airplanes, you're going to fly in different environments. And I think one of the uniquenesses that we have out here in Vegas is we have a lot of wind and we have a lot of crosswinds. So maintaining crosswind correction and as well as performing the maneuver successfully is something that ultimately is difficult to evaluate sometimes.
So there was a question that came up. We talked about this when we talked about setting up the webinar here, and I'll open this up to kind of all of you in talking about emphasizing aeronautical decision making. And in each of these examples, we've seen where there's been some decision making that has probably not gone the way it should have. Can we talk a little bit more, maybe in some detail, about how that whole process works and how your applicants manage risk and what you're looking for in there? I'll open that up. Who'd like to just unmute and go ahead and start talking on that?
I'll start.
Okay.
So I think that's always the primary thing. I mean, the biggest thing that I'm looking for on especially private pilot check rides is that they've taken this step out of motoring the airplane around and physically flying it to being a pilot and making decisions. And those two pieces are both pieces that we have to be able to do efficiently. And I think to what Jason said, and as well as the go-around decision topic I wanted to talk about, having an internal checklist that says, hey, I'm getting to a point, I need to have all of these elements done. That decision making starts, when we start the airplane or before we start the airplane, but also as we're flying, that they're revisiting that and ensuring that they have those elements accomplished and they're prepared to accomplish the next phase of the flight, whether it's a maneuver or a landing or doing an instrument approach, and they have all the things done. And if not, what do you do next? We don't have a pause button, but we have a lot of options out there. Generally, we have good decision making and have lots of fuel, so we have lots of time. And what tools are available if things are not going the direction we want, and how do we use those to make good decisions?
I think that's a really important point. I mean, we're really looking for people to be the pilot in command and be savvy enough that we're really, I tell people, we're really just an annoying passenger in the right seat asking for a bunch of maneuvers. We're not there to make the decisions for you. We're there to see, can you do this if we're not there? And even today I had an applicant, and I'll give a shout out to Liam if he's listening. Here we were coming in for landing. He says, man, I'm high and I don't like this. I'm just going to go around. And he did it. He made the decision. I said, well, you sure you want to go around? He said, yeah, the runway's going to get short otherwise. Okay, cool. And it was checkride nerves, and he settled down for the second landing. He did a great job. That's really a good decision, and it takes a little bit of pilot, I guess, mental fortitude to be the one who's in command of the airplane, not just riding along, and to have some confidence in the fact that, look, I can make a right choice here. And that's something we're looking for on the Checkride. You don't have to fly perfectly, but you do have to make decisions that give us the opportunity to say, look, this guy knows what they're doing. This gal knows what she's doing. We have a good pilot here that I'm not worried about whether they're going to make poor decisions later on. So I think that's really important. And, we come to Sean's point of crashing the point. If it's not going to work, go around. And we see this many times where we're going to force this to the ground, no matter what happens. And boy, if you're going to do that because you just want to hit your short field, would you rather crash or fail your check ride? And I'm thinking failing your check ride sounds better than crashing either way. Or perhaps you made a good decision, went around, and you were not going to fail because we'll give you that shot to come around and fix it because you made good decisions. And that's a big piece, and make those decisions with a timely manner.
Okay. Can everybody else hear again?
I think we got you again.
Okay. I don't hear John.
I don't either.
There we go.
We'll just go on
All
without
right,
him if we have to, right, John?
Yeah, that's fine. You guys carry on. That's that decision making, right? You just carry on with what you need to do, and that's fine. That's great examples there, Jason. Thank you. So
Could I
go ahead. Yeah.
And Sean was talking about communicating during the debriefing, and I find it's important to really clarify you are PIC. Not only that, you are an instrument pilot, and that's how you're doing this flight as an instrument pilot. You're already there. And then I make a joke, innocent until proven guilty, but just to help them get in that way. And then I think it's also very good, especially for private pilot, to hear that we don't log the time like your CFI does. We really are. You really are in charge. Yeah.
And it gets in my briefings as well, probably no less than 3 times that you're pilot in command in this whole thing. I'm your first pain in the butt passenger. And it's really great. There's a bit of check ride anxiety we know are played into every one of these check rides, but every once in a while, you'll see some situation from an applicant, you will see them lose that anxiety and actually really take the bull by the horns and do something correct. I had an applicant a week and a half ago at a busy airport that things got real busy real quick, and all of a sudden there was like a switch going off for her that she took control. I see that airplane, I'm going to follow it. I'm like, awesome decision. And I didn't even have to sit there. I just say, okay, she knows what she's going. That solidified in my mind that she is pilot in command here. She's not letting a controller dictate what she should do or anything like that. She's got it. She's got that idea on what she needs to do.
Okay. Well, that's good. And Chris, I've got another question for you, and then of course anybody else can jump in on this. But what is the question that you normally find candidates don't know the answer to that they should? In other words, what is the area of least preparation that you feel is missing in training today? And I guess this is applicable to everybody. So we'll start with Chris and just kind of go around and talk about that for a moment or two.
There's recently I've had a kind of a uptick in people using computerized flight plans, and so it doesn't matter if it's for flight. That's the most popular one. I'll ask them, number one, what power setting yields this true airspeed that you're using here? And some answers are, I just picked the generic profile. Okay. And then I'll go on to that from there, and I'll ask, I see you have a time between this checkpoint and this checkpoint. How long did it take you? I'll ask something like that. And they said, oh, it's 10 minutes. Well, what if it took you 12 minutes to get between these 2 checkpoints? What's your ground speed? And then from that second checkpoint, how long will it take you to get to your destination, and how much fuel will you burn? And I've had several applicants look at me and not be able to answer that. I'll even step out of the room for a few minutes. And I know one applicant Googled it because it was like his 5th time Googling that answer. And so that unfortunately is becoming a crutch. They okay, it says it's this, but what's the reality of it when we're flying up there? Oh, I'll just use the GPS. Okay. And then the interesting part is that usually correlates back to their knowledge test. We'll see in there, oh, look, you got flight planning, determining ground speed, doing this or doing that. I'm like, there's a big gap right there. So I have been seeing a lack of understanding with what's really going on with real life from that aspect of it. That one's kind of disturbing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause and effect.
Yeah. For example, deviation. How does ForeFlight calculate deviation? They don't. They have no idea what the deviation is in your airplane. So that's up to you to figure that out and apply it. And there's not even a place on their form to figure that out, as far as I'm aware, to calculate that in. But and then what was the second part of that question you had for me, John?
What areas of least or let's see, what is the area of least preparation that you feel is missing in training today?
Well, okay, so some of that's an over-reliance on technology, and then an under-reliance on technology from the same thing. I had an example earlier this week of an applicant who really did not understand how a blocked static port would be presented on his G1000. How would he know he had one?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, well, the red X's would come up. No, that's not what happens. And so that's kind of, there has to be a happy medium between using the technology that's there and flying the airplane. You know, you don't, you know, as a private pilot, you don't need to, you know, take off at 1,000 feet, hit the autopilot, let it level off at 3,500 feet, and then you turn it off at 1,000 feet. But, you know, if you're on cruise in between here and there and you need to pick up something, that might be a good idea to use that autopilot then. Or a good scenario for a private pilot might be you inadvertently entered the clouds. What are you going to do? And I think out of 21 years I've been doing this with people with autopilots, especially on the private pilot level, I think I've only had 2, maybe 3 people go, I didn't engage the autopilot in altitude and heading mode and work it from there. Awesome idea. That's how you use that stuff to get yourself out of that situation. So it doesn't alleviate the task of manually manipulating the airplane underneath the hood, but it's excellent show of use of resources available to you.
Okay.
Can I ask a question of the panel myself?
Sure.
Talk about under the hood and private pilot. I'm not a fan of seeing a private pilot shoot approaches under the hood, and I wish that they were being taught time turns and how to save themselves in the cloud. So I just wonder if you're seeing that also. And
not approaches from my angle.
Private pilot level.
Private pilot level, inadvertent IMC statistically is a very high fatality rate, if not the #1 thing. And there isn't, nobody has a checklist out there. Do you have a written checklist? What are you gonna do? And the number of applicants that come to me, and I do ground reference maneuvers. We're about 1,000 feet, give them straight and level, and I hand them the hood. The scenario is you're pressing your way onto your destination. The weather got lower and lower. Now you're at 1,000 feet off the ground and you're in the clouds. What are you gonna do? And it's quiet in there. I don't know. I'm gonna descend. Great. How far are you gonna go? I quite literally, one answer was until I'm out of the clouds. And you know, so it's an emergency procedure, but no checklist. You know, first of all, foremost, fly the airplane. Second thing, make that 180. Third thing, are you at a safe altitude? If not, get to a safe altitude and then call for help if you need to. First or foremost, fly that airplane. because your life depends on it at this point. Statistics prove it.
Yeah. Okay.
But not a
Question-
steep turn, a standard rate turn.
Correct. A standard rate turn, please, 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 please.
Another question that came up, we had a couple in a similar vein talking about, and you mentioned this, Chris, when you were talking about your example of somebody not having a good score on the written exam in a particular area. How important or how does the written test score actually play into the oral exam? Is 70 good enough? Is 90 better? Is that gonna color your approach to the oral exam? Jason, you want to start with that?
Sure. I think there's a couple things here. One, the score is less important to me than what the areas were. And actually, one of the things an examiner has to do is we look at the areas found deficient on the knowledge test, which is why most of the time your examiner will ask for your IACRA information before, so we can look up what you got wrong on the knowledge test. That actually has to be incorporated into our plan of action. So expect that you're going to get questions on the things you got wrong on the knowledge test. Your instructor had to review them with you, and we have to make sure we have tested those areas because they were areas that were found deficient. So those are the things that we're certainly going to be incorporating questions on. It's kind of like a heads up of what you're going to get asked about. We have to ask about that amongst other things. And then the score itself, I'll be honest, doesn't make a whole lot of difference to me. The pass is the pass, but I do get a little bit inquisitive sometimes when I can tell somebody just memorized all the questions from some test prep app. They say, hey, I studied for 2 days and memorized all the questions, and now I don't remember any of them again. And I've actually had people tell me that on the practical test, which is, thanks for the heads up, and we're going to make sure our questioning is good and thorough here. So sometimes a 98 that's memorized shows me less competency than a 78 from somebody who really studied hard and learned the material.
Okay. Sean or Christine, you want to add anything to that?
I saw Sean's hand up.
Yeah, let's see if I can get him unmuted here.
There we go.
Yep.
On the knowledge test, I think Jason's point is correct. It has more to do with, the areas that were missed and if they're consistent, and then how those questions on the actual exam, how they answer them and how they've been able to work through them. And, not as often as I wish, but a lot of times I've had students, say, hey, these are the areas I was missing and I've done this to study, and they talk about their process to gain that knowledge. And that's really helpful. It makes me feel really good that they're, identifying the areas that they were weak in, and they're able to find a way to learn that new material. And that's going to help them as things change in the rest of their flying. So it's going to be really helpful. I did have one other thing on the previous question. Is it okay?
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah.
So an area that I see that's relatively weak is understanding the aircraft performance, and it kind of goes into looking at time, fuel, and distance on your cross-country planning, but also your climb performance. I think we're slightly different where it's 114 degrees outside and flying 50-year-old airplanes, and students don't necessarily compute the climb gradients correctly for the instrument. They're not aware of it. They just say, I'm going to do this departure because they gave it to me, and they can't prove to me that they're going to be able to make it safely. And then on top of that, we get out to the airplane and I ask, are we meeting these climb gradients? Are we following what the book said? And is the aircraft actually performing as it was supposed to? It never is. And what's the reason for that? Is the airspeed off a little bit? Is the performance just down? Is the temperature different? There's many different answers. But then taking that a step further to say, okay, well, are we going to be able to complete this safely? And what steps are you going to take? Are you going to have to deviate from your plan? Are you going to have to climb a different way because you're not going to make your climb over the mountains? Or what's the situation? So taking, and applying the aircraft performance that they have, and then applying that into not only their planning to ensure that they had good, safe planning, but also as the aircraft meeting that and actually doing that in the air is something conversations that get much longer than I wish.
Yes. Or lack of pre-takeoff debrief.
Yeah.
Where I see issues with performance, Sean's got the high DA, but here out in Wisconsin, 800 to 1,000 foot field elevations, a lot of people don't understand the relationship between VX and VY and how they change with altitudes. And they might be able to tell me, oh yeah, my rate of climb is going to decrease and my runway length, takeoff distance are going to increase, but they have no idea that, you know, VY up at 5,000 feet is going to be less than what it was at sea level. And they don't understand, well, if you don't have the right numbers to fly with it, your performance is going to suffer that much more.
Okay, Christine, here's a question for you as a sport pilot examiner and versus a private pilot examiner. Is there a difference? Isn't it just flying the airplane? Is it, you know, why is there a big difference there? What's going on?
There's not a big difference. I mean, yes, whoever stated that, absolutely right. I mean, the light sport, and I'd have to get the book out to be, you know, specific about the differences, but, you know, smaller cross country, it's a smaller airplane. Everything's just kind of smaller, but do you take off and land and talk on the radio and do everything else the same? Are the emergencies the same? Absolutely. Is a light sport any less? No. It's a wonderful opportunity for people to fly that might not have an opportunity to do that otherwise. Are the limitations of it appropriate? I would say yes, because of the parameters. But most people, you know, come to me in a light sport aircraft and get their PPL.
Okay.
That's a good option.
Yeah.
I have a little bit different from the sport pilot. The guys that come to me, or the individuals that come to me for sport pilot, that's pretty much all that they do. And I don't see a lot of the new light sport aircraft. I see the Cubs, the Champs, the Chiefs. I see the Antique and Classic in my neck of the woods for the light sport aircraft. And the majority of them, I would say, are people, usually men in their upper 60s, 70s. The oldest one I did was 85 years old in an Aeronautica Champ several years ago.
Awesome.
Yeah. But you know, really the standards are very, very similar. There's a couple of knowledge areas that are slightly different, but it's a great way to get yourself into it. You know, to start off on a smaller scale and something where you don't need a medical. Unfortunately, I don't think it's as popular as really what it could be.
Yeah, I needed to do a check ride in an air coupe in South Carolina. You know, they'll bring you down.
Here's a good question for those of you that are doing the instrument rides. What problems do you see with instrument applicants, and why do you think these are getting past the double I's? Who wants to take that one?
This is Jason. It's a good question, and it's kind of a hot button for me because I'll be honest, my double I pass rate's not great. I think there's a lot of double I's out there that assume that if I'm right seat proficient to fly, that means I'm a good instrument instructor, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're there. And I think that's showing in the instrument students. One of the things we have with digital training and testing now is that, boy, you know, you used to bring me the Michigan approach plates or the Nevada approach plates, and that's all we had. But now with the digital EFB, I'm going to ask you approach plates all around the country. And we're going to look at things, and it's not just the 5 or 6 approaches maybe you're shooting lately. And what I'm looking for is, do you have the skills to actually understand and decipher the plate, not just have a couple of plates memorized? So I think that's something that's really getting missed in the CFIIs. And you know, so if you're sitting down with a student, if you're a CFII listening to this, or if you're an instrument candidate went to your CFI II, go just start picking approaches all around the country. I can't tell you as an examiner that I work too hard to figure out which ones I'm even going to plan ahead. I'll just zoom into a place, grab an approach, and we'll say, hey man, I think we're going to go to, I don't know, Morrison, Tennessee today. So what do we got down here, and what are the winds doing, and which approach would you do, and let's decipher it and see how you would do it, and can you do that approach with the airplane you brought, and what are the limitations based on the avionics you have? And that's something that's regularly getting missed. Do we have GPS? Do we have GPS that's WAS or non-WAS? Do you have DME that's coming from the GPS, or do you have a separate DME system? And those scenarios start to play out, and they really dig people into a hole. So I think that's something that really got to look at, you know, what's the systemic approach to it, not just a couple of approaches that you have memorized.
Mhm.
I would agree with that as well. And I like to sit down on both the instrument and the double I and share fly a couple approach procedures in there and ask them, how are you going to set this up? For example, a DME arc on a G1000 or a 430 or something like that. And applicants, they're not consistent in their answers. They may give me one way or another way and they've never heard, or just, you know, bizarre things. Another thing that's with approach plates are up in the upper left-hand corner of your approach box. I call that the notes that can kill. So you kind of go through and I'll ask, how do these apply? Do these notes apply to us and how? And from a CFI standpoint, I'll ask why or why not. You know, well, it says here that, you know, the temperature above this or below that, this approach is not authorized. Does that apply to us? Why or why not? And I get a lot from a double I. They may say, no, it doesn't apply. And then I ask, well, why not? And it could be just as simple as we don't have that equipment installed in our aircraft, but they're not sure why that's there. And probably like Jason, my double I failure rate is high right now. And it actually comes, the hardest part has been, there's two required subject matters right off the bat. One of them is basically aircraft systems, knowledge of your flight instruments and stuff like that. The other one is the required, there's a cross country that you have to plan. So the scenario that I use, I'm a private pilot. I got 50 hours of cross country time, 10 hours in the aircraft, cross country time, and I'm just starting my instrument rating. Teach me how to fly a instrument cross country when I know the basics of that. And stuff that gets thoroughly confused or left out is alternate requirements and fuel planning. It quite literally is left entirely out of their lesson plan of it, or they give me extremely bad information. For example, it says, I lost track of that example I had, but it really does happen quite frequently. And it reflects back down into the instrument students as well.
So it sounds like, Chris, you're saying, and Jason, you want to see the full package, not just them focusing on performing the instrument double I, but that includes everything they've learned, and that as it should.
Yeah. I don't necessarily, from an instrument cross country, when I ask them to teach that instrument cross country, I'm not at this point, I will even remind them of this. I know how to go into the POH, pull out a power setting, a true airspeed, a fuel burn. I know how to do that. So I try to save a little bit of time with that. But, you know, how did you pick your route today? What things do I need to think about from getting from A to B? SIDS and stars, ODPs get left out. Today's applicant botched the, that's a word of mine apparently, the lost comm procedure and didn't follow the regulation. He spit out Avenue F and MEA, but didn't apply it correctly. And even when we went to the regulation, he was unsure what was going on there. So there's a correlation there that it just kind of falls apart on the CFI double I level.
So how do you feel about applicants who talk out their decision-making process? Do you like to hear that? Is that comfortable for you? Or do you think they're maybe just, you know, trying to get through it? What are your thoughts on that? Do you like to say that?
It's great.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it helps understand the decisions. And like I said earlier, we're trying to apply today's decisions into many different scenarios in the future. And I can't read their mind, unfortunately, and I wish I could sometimes, but without that, you know, being able to hear their decision making and go through, okay, I'm not going to do this because I'm going to do this because, and then they check it and maybe the answer they come up with in the book says, oh, that's not going to work, and they work through the next, you know, option. That's totally fine, and I encourage that a lot.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we touched on this next question earlier, but let's go back, just revisit it briefly. If you know you're going to botch a short field landing, or any landing for that matter, or even a maneuver, should you, in the case of the landing, go around? Is that going to count against you? From what I'm hearing here, I would think no, because you're seeing a good decision being made. Like Jason said with his student, I'm going to run out of runway, so I'm going to go around. But what about a maneuver? Let's say a steep turn goes wrong, or a chandelle or a lazy 8. What then?
I mean, my answer is fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. If you made an active decision to say, look, I started my chandelle, I'm a little bit off, I'm going to go ahead and bail out of this, fix it and do it. We haven't failed you yet. You're making an active decision. That shows me we're going to continue testing. So the examiner's job is to see if you consistently exceed standards, and if you can make good decisions and get yourself into standard and do it. Now, can we give you 7 tries? No. If you start making a turn and it's a little bit off, you say, look, I'm going to roll out and I'm going to fix this, and you nail it the next time, you're almost always going to pass. Now, if you're doing that on every single maneuver, that's consistent exceedance of standards. So, we all make a little bit of a mistake here and there. We don't expect perfection. Make a good decision and fix it, and show that you're in control of that airplane.
Have you ever had a client in the plane that noticed it, said it, and then didn't fix it? And,
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's
absolutely. Hey, look,
debriefing.
I'm 200 feet low on my steep turn.
Fix
Okay.
it.
Right. And when you finished it, you were too, and now you failed. I mean, do something about it. That's an important part.
Okay.
I'm notoriously rather quiet in the airplane. I play that passenger when they're running through a maneuver or something like that. Sometimes the applicant will botch it, use my word there, and they go, oh, can I try it again? And I just kind of shrug my shoulders. I let them make the decision. Usually it's within standards and they just want to do better, or it's way outside the other, and I just see what happens. The continued testing, do I allow them to, was that for practice? No, that's not for practice. But you're allowed to make errors, and I would rather see you make an error and, as Jason said, fix it, than just, oh, I'm off 200 feet and just sit it there and move on to the next maneuver. But technically repeating maneuvers isn't allowable, from the ACS requirements. So I just kind of sit there, let them make the decision, and watch. The consistently exceeding tolerances could be weighed 2 different ways. From the way I see it, in the grand scheme of thing throughout the check ride, were they consistently exceeding the tolerances? For example, they were outside of tolerances on the steep turns, and then they were outside of tolerances out of the chandelle, and then they blew a short field landing. So are we seeing a pattern of consistently exceeding the tolerances? And then we have the exceeding the tolerances for the specific maneuver. Sometimes if you're doing a steep turn and you go 125 feet too low, 130 feet too low, but you make a correction for it and get it back up there and stay at 2, well, okay, that looks good, and you leave it alone. So it's kind of a graduated scale, if you would say, in some respects with that. But overall, you got to remain within the standards in the ACS and keep it safe.
I think what you're saying, Chris, is that we know we're human, and perfection is not how we're built.
Correct.
But recognizing it, fixing it, is what we expect and need to see.
Right.
And not busting the parameter too much.
And a lot of us even throw that in our briefings, that perfection is not the standard. I'm not perfect. Just ask my wife. But anyway.
Yeah. So I have another interesting question here. Never had this happen in previous 2 check rides, but on my commercial, the DPE told me that the FAA might call me to give an evaluation of the DPE's performance. I was sort of surprised. Do any of the DPEs include this in their brief, or have they had it happen? So that's a good question.
Well, thanks for the reminder. I need to put that in my debriefing.
Part of our observations on a yearly basis is the FAA will conduct background investigations, and part of that is contacting applicants and asking their experiences with us. It could be simple performance type questions. Hey, when your pilot examiner gave you that engine failure, were you going to be able to land in the field you picked? Something like, okay, they're kind of looking to make sure we uphold the standards that we're entrusted to uphold. And, did they give you a briefing? We're required to give you a pre-test briefing and a pre-flight briefing. One of the things that I used to say that I got called on, it's minor, but it's actually, kind of important, is I used to say at the end of my briefing, okay, there were no questions or anything. I used to say, let's begin the test. Technically, the wording is the test has begun. And I was called out on that, and that's fine. I make that correction, and that's part of my briefing. Okay, the test has begun, type thing. So yeah, they will call occasionally if I know I'm up for review, because we all have our annual observations and stuff like that, where they know that you're going to make the call. Hey, you may get a phone call, you may get an email, asking about this check ride. Just be honest. I got nothing to hide. We make mistakes, and frankly, if I made one, I want to know about it so I can correct it and move on.
Okay.
I think it's important that they know that they're actually calling to check about the DPE. They're not calling to check about you, the candidate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I have another question here. Who do you want to hear from when it comes time to schedule the check ride? Do you want to hear from the flight instructor? Do you want to hear from the applicant? I know I used to, when I was actively flight instructing at the FBO before I came to AOPA, I had a DP that I used on a very regular basis, and I would always make sure I introduced my applicant to them ahead of the check ride so they could see that, yeah, you regular human being, not an ogre. And my examiner that I used really, he would debrief me after the check ride, which I really appreciated. He debriefed the student. Sometimes it was together. But in making the appointment, who do you guys want to hear from, and why?
Doesn't matter to me. The only thing that I want to know is, are they ready for the check ride? In other words, they're pretty much endorsed. They meet all the requirements, etc. A lot of times the students will call me, and that works great for scheduling because they know their schedule, and vice versa. A couple of schools, they have a dispatcher, and they'll call and say, hey, we've got several check rides coming up. We could use you for these 3 days, type of thing, from that aspect of it. So I don't really care, as long as they're ready for the check ride. If you go, well, I still got my cross country and my night flying to do, no, don't bother calling me, because I won't schedule you more than maybe 2.5 weeks out. Just because things change, airplanes break, weather goes bad, my work schedule may change, etc. As far as the debriefings go, I used to, early on in my career doing the check rides, is I would call the recommending instructor after the check ride and give them a debrief. I have since kind of changed that for one particular reason. I don't call them, I let them call me, and it shows me the instructor's commitment to their student and to their teaching. If they don't really call me, even if it's successful or not successful, I kind of wonder what level that they're really vested in their students' performance,
Right.
Type of thing. It sets a little bit of a tone for me, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I would say to answer this question, for me, it kind of depends. I think there's two pieces to it. We've had some issues over the last 2 years in just getting schedules and getting DPE availability. And what I found was a lot of students were getting put on the schedule for myself and a lot of other people that weren't prepared. And they were canceling pretty last minute because things didn't go as planned, as always happens in aviation. And the unfortunate thing is we had probably upwards of 30%. I think one instructor had a 40% cancellation rate for a quarter in Las Vegas. So that was a lot of students that could have gotten done, and therefore just created this big bottleneck. So consequently, I require students to be signed off and prepared before I put them on the schedule, which goes into them being an applicant. That means that they're actually ready to go. And that's helped in a couple of ways, because I've been able to collect the information And I collect a bunch of information, not only IACRA, but pictures of documents and things like that. That way I can validate the stuff and do all the materials and review that I need to. But it also ensures, when they get to the questionnaire, it's an online questionnaire that links to my schedule, and they go through it and they go, oh, I don't have an IACRA application number yet. I said, well, that's good. You can just, check back as soon as you're available. They said, well, I'd like to reserve this date. And I said, well, it's not fair to me to reserve the date for somebody who's not ready if there is somebody that's ready, but the ultimate thing that's worked out in everyone's benefit is doing this. My schedule never really fills up until 2 weeks out. So everyone's been able to get a schedule within a week, 2 weeks, and there's always availability on there. It's hard for the students, and I understand that students want to plan, I got to check right in 6 weeks, but so many elements can go wrong and interfere with that waiting till students are prepared has really helped. And who schedules, because I'm only scheduling known applicants and that are already signed off, it doesn't really make a difference. It works best if it's the CFI or the school admin that's doing it, just because they know what the questions mean and can get through the questionnaire relatively quickly. But one issue I did see at some of the larger schools was students, trying to get schedules and trying to reserve dates, and then I show up and the airplane's not booked because they never told anybody, or the school didn't know about it, doesn't have a graduation certificate ready for them. So it really depends on ensuring that all those steps are completed prior to them getting on the schedule. And as long as that's done, it doesn't matter.
So I want to add on to that. I think an important part here is not necessarily always who schedules, but at least that both of them know the scheduling's happening. I've actually had cases where an applicant has shown up and I'm missing paperwork, and I call the instructor and say, hey, how come we're missing? And they say, wait a minute, I didn't know Susie was there for a check ride today. She's not ready. Oops. So it's important that, that the instructor know, and I think that's important also on check ride day, that they be available, because if there is a paperwork hiccup or if we've got something that needs to be solved, can we call them? And I mean, it's a digital age. My God, if I need an endorsement, email it to me, fax it to me. I guess probably not faxes anymore for most places, right? But shoot me a text. I mean, something that I can count and make something work. If we're missing something, even better, can you be there for the check ride, and take that moment of being there for your student, keeping them calm that day, but also being there in case we have any hiccups. So, schedule, know when they're doing it, make sure they're not scheduling 2 or 3 examiners. That happens once in a while, and that wastes some time for all of us. Make sure you're taking an active part if you're an instructor and making sure your instructor is helping you through that process. It's a little bit less critical when somebody's doing an advanced rating, an instrument, a multi, commercial, when they've done a check ride before. But really, for private rides, the instructor should be helping them schedule this and help them through. They don't know what they're doing yet. They call this big mean examiner and say, my God, what all do they need from me? Do they know they need this knowledge test code? Do they know they need IACRA? Do they even know what IACRA is yet? So be that part and look onto your instructor. If you got a check ride coming up and you're private, don't try and do this all on your own. Make your instructor do their part. That's their job. And if you're an instructor, be there for your student. If it's a little bit more advanced, it certainly helps if the applicant is engaged in this process because they know their schedule. Instead of playing, telephone games between 3 different people, call directly and look at what that scheduling availability is and make sure you know and it's going to work.
Okay. All right. Well, as you can all see, when given a chance, an examiner really likes to talk. And they're not just there to ask questions. But unfortunately, we are actually past our 8 o'clock time. So I'm going to ask each of you to kind of go around the horn here, a pearl of wisdom for applicants, instructors coming to a check ride. And then we'll kind of do the wrap up, and I'll give you the secret code to get the badge and the points. So let's start. Go ahead, Chris.
I guess my thing would be relax, breathe, fly the airplane, fly the aircraft, whatever it takes from that aspect of it. I'm just there to observe. I'm just a passenger, but relax, breathe, fly the airplane. And if you probably hit the number of people that I've given check rides for, they'll hear that at the airplane. Fly the airplane. Yeah, that's what I would just relax, breathe, fly the airplane.
Yeah. Jason?
I think the biggest pearl for me is don't try and have us fly in a non-airworthy aircraft. This is something that happens a lot. That everybody kind of knows 91-205, and they spit back what the required instruments are. But applying, whether we have a minimum equipment list, which most aircraft don't, is there a kinds of operation list, and beyond that, if something's broken, that type certificate data sheet pretty much is going to tell us whether it's on the aircraft. It probably has to work. So multiple times over the last year, both myself and other examiners have had the geez, I see that fuel gauge is not reporting, or I see the CHT gauge is not reporting, or I see, in my case recently, the flaps indicator doesn't work. Can we fly? And in some cases they'll say, hey, I don't think we can do that. We found this and this is a problem. In many cases it's, well, I flew it here this way. It's okay. Let's go anyway. And the examiner's going to let you basically taxi out when we get to the point where you say, look, I'm going to go ahead and fly. We're going to stop and say you're flying an unairworthy airplane, and you box us in. So I know you want to get check rides done, and many times there are flight training airplanes that take their beatings in flight training. But if something's wrong, make sure we're not trying to get into an airplane that's unairworthy. Make sure you know what it means to allow something to be inoperative. And if it's not done properly, don't try and get us as an examiner to fly it, because we're going to have to issue a disapproval if you're trying to take us in an unairworthy airplane. And this happens all too frequently.
Christine.
Own your own check ride. Don't trust your CFI, your double I, to be in charge of your check ride, because you are PIC, and what that means is not anything legal, but you are the one in charge of flying the plane. So get that mindset 2 weeks before your date, and then see if you can think about energy management. The plane is built to fly. You're just putting in just the right inputs so it flies. You're not in charge of the whole thing. The plane knows how to fly.
Okay. Sean?
I would say preparation, and I say and know that that's a very broad topic, but understanding and kind of going into what Jason and Christine both said is being prepared and using those to give you the most options to have a successful outcome. When things don't go right, be in charge of it and know that you are confident in yourself that you can use those tools to accomplish the check ride safely, to make sure the aircraft's airworthy, to deal with the fact that the traffic pattern's full at this airport. We have to do something in a different order than we normally did, and just have confidence in yourself, and confidence comes from being prepared and reviewing it.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank you all for being here with us on the webinar. We have reached the end of it. I know we still have a lot of unanswered questions. We will have those, and we'll try to get some answers out to you over the next week or so as we go through them and try to get that taken care of for you. If you're not an AOPA member, I would encourage you to join, particularly if you enjoyed this content, although you don't have to be a member to get this. We do appreciate your support. And then here we go. The AOPA Pilot Passport, here's the badge. This is what it looks like. Go ahead and enter that code ASI Web 073020 in the affiliate code redemption section on the passport. So if you don't know where the passport is, it's on the AOPA app. When you open it up, you'll see a little link there to go to My Passport, and click on that, and then go down and you'll see the affiliate links section. You can enter that code in there. You'll get the badge. You'll get the 1,000 points. You'll move up a little bit on the leaderboard. Jason's doing it right now. I can see that. He's going for it. That's okay.
I got to spot check it to make sure it works here.
It does. It does work. So
I
we will have
people to catch me and see if I can, find a way to catch those darn leaders up there.
Okay, well, good luck with that. Good luck with that. We will have another ASI safety webinar next month. It will be on forced landings, a plan to survive. That will be on August 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll send a registration link for that webinar, and a follow-up email we'll send to this one. And we'll also give you a direct link to the webinar recording that we've done. So if you want to go back and review, maybe you missed something, maybe you thought we said something and something else, that's fine. Go ahead, you'll be able to review that. It will be on the AOPA website. Just go to webinars.aopa.org. You'll be able to find also our archived webinars from our previous safety webinars there, as well as others. And that's about it for this evening. Thank you very much. So long.
Don, I'm going to add one thing. You got one thing wrong here. I've had 2 people text me. It's not 1,000 points. You're getting 2,000 points. So there you go, an extra bonus for everybody
Wow.
tonight.
2,000 points. All right, I'll have to talk to somebody about that. Supposed to be 1,000. That's
Just don't
fine.
take it away for those that already got it. Okay.
No, I wouldn't. If you got 2,000 points, great. Good luck. Go for it. And everybody, so long and fly safe.
Good night.
Good night.